This study was undertaken in June 2018 with the objective of assessing the status of drugs and substance abuse among primary school children in Kenya. Within the context that we were working in, we know that drug use and substance abuse is a global challenge. In education sector, it affects performance, repetition, and dropout. In the previous studies that had been undertaken, it was established that the onset of drug use and substance abuse is basically during the transition from primary to secondary school education, which then indicates that as policy intervention, if we have to tackle the issue of drug use and substance abuse, we have to start early. However, there has been limited evidence on the status, the preference, and risk factors that cause drug use and substance abuse, particularly at the early years of schooling, because the previous studies which indicated that most learners were using drugs and substances of abuse, it had a pointer that could have started much, much earlier. With that then, we had the objectives of the study where we were looking at the knowledge, the attitudes, and also availability, accessibility, and the preference, risk factors, and how effective life skills are in protecting the young learners from saying no to drug use and substance abuse. The survey on assessment of knowledge, attitudes, and use of drugs and substances of abuse among primary school children in Kenya, which was commissioned in June 2018, covered 3,307 pupils from 177 primary schools with a response rate of 82.7%. Data was collected from 25 representative counties, and these counties were spread across all the regions in the country. Right from the coast to Nairobi, we had Nyanza, Western, Rift Valley, Central, Eastern, Upper and Lower, and also from representation from the northeastern part. The findings indicate that primary school pupils are very knowledgeable on the different drugs and substances of abuse. Tobacco, alcohol, bang were the most widely known drugs. 8 out of every 10 learners were aware that tobacco is a drug. 8 out of every 10 pupils were also aware that alcohol is a drug, and 7 out of 10 were also aware that cannabis were substances of abuse. According to the survey findings, most widely available drugs and substances of abuse were tobacco, prescription drugs, alcohol, and also miraha. 20% of the pupils indicated that they have ever used at least one drug. In this study, what we did was to ask first the pupils who were sampled, have you ever used any drug? And later on, we asked them, have you ever used a drug in the last 30 days, which then constituted the current use. For the lifetime use, that is if they have ever used any drug, 2 out of 10 indicated they might have. used some form of drug, and this includes all the types of drug that we were assessing, starting from alcohol, tobacco, prescription, and here we were looking at the abuse of all those drugs. 1 out of 10 primary school pupils indicated the use of prescription drugs in the sense of abuse. 7% indicated having ever tested alcohol. 6% indicated having ever encountered the use of tobacco. 3.7% indicated having ever used marijuana, and 1% cannabis. Lifetime use of inhalants was quite less, around less than 1%. The average in terms of the median age of various drugs that were being used was 11 years. What was of interest was the fact that children indicated at around 4 years there was some test of one drug also, which indicates that if we have to look at interventions, then we must start much early. And this relates to the findings we find later on how they were assessing these drugs. Some of them indicated the access started much earlier, mostly at home, indicating that even as policymakers, we have to use a paradigm shift in terms of how we tackle issues of drug use and also substances of abuse. When we looked at current use, 16% of primary school pupils indicated they were using some form of drug, and here we were looking at class 5 to 8 pupils. 7.2% indicated current use of prescription drugs, 3.2% currently using alcohol, 2.6% currently using tobacco. 2.3% indicated use of marijuana, and around 1% in terms of the use of cannabis. This indicates spatial distribution of two drugs, that is alcohol and tobacco. From the regions that we covered, there were diversities whereby some regions are more affected than others. And the indication here is that maybe there's some correlation in terms of how the drugs come to the market, that's to the country. When it comes to the main sources of drugs in schools, kiosks and shops near schools were identified as the main source at around 28.6%. Another source was that if there was a pan near by the school, some learners indicated they could have gotten them from friends or even bought from fellow students, and some from workers. The period when use and abuse was highest was during school holidays. This again takes us back to the home, the community, and where the learners spend most of their time. On their way home at 22%, meaning we need also to look at the safety of the children to and from school. During weekends at around 21%, during inter-school competitions. You can see all these factors relate to the environment. Basically, not the teaching and learning process, because there the environment is well taken care of. The main source is what happens after the teaching and learning has taken place, which means if we have to look at the interventions to tackle drug use and substance abuse, we have to go beyond the school. Risk factors. In this objective, We went further to identify what are the effects of drug use and substance abuse using various methods. We found that learners who are likely to use drugs and substances of abuse are likely to have higher rates of repetition at around 18%, and the effect in terms of academic performance was 6.4%, meaning if one was using a drug or a substance of abuse, then the effect on performance was around 6.4% compared to those who are not using. Primary school pupils from families where one or both parents or guardians were using drugs or substances of abuse were more likely to use drugs much later. Primary school pupils with knowledge of a friend or a schoolmate who was using a drug or a substance of abuse had also a high likelihood of using the drug, and this leads to the challenge of peer pressure. Still on risk factors, when we interacted with the learners, the indication of maybe parents being accompanied by pupils and learners to events where drugs and maybe alcohol was being used was a major risk factor, because the young children have high level of being influenced by the environment and what happens around them. Availability at home was rated very high in terms of use later on in life. Other risk factors include family conflict, exposure to advertisements, and also the media, whereby some young children, maybe they tend to use the negative part of the media, whereby they get the information, but then they want to test. The people around learners also had an indication in terms of being a risk, and also shops near the schools. What then can we do to tackle this issue of drug use and substance abuse among young learners in primary schools? First, we need to focus on issues of sensitization. And I'm aware that the government through the ministry has put a number of interventions in place, including counseling. But if you have seen the findings, the risk factors are beyond the school environment. Hence, sensitization has to start right from the community, even in our own families, because that is where the learners spend their time. Encouraging and also enhancing unsmoking and drinking attitude. This was found to have higher benefits, because if you are able to say no, then you are able to face the negative environment around you, and you are able to survive without being influenced. So the main area of intervention is to develop the skills to say no. And that goes beyond education. It goes to advocacy. It goes to using the community, civil society, the churches, to help the young children right from very early age, 4 years, and even before they go to school, to know what is right and what is wrong in terms of drugs and substances of abuse. We need to enhance efforts towards lowering the levels of access and availability of drugs and substances of abuse, enforcing guidelines which have been put in place, particularly when it comes to construction of structures or business premises near learning institutions, enforcing the ban on sale of cigarettes in one stick. This could help reduce the affordability among the young learners, keeping drugs and substances at home. This comes back to the guardians and the family setup to rethink how we look at the issues of drugs and also substances. The government can do their part, but as communities and also as families, we have to do our part because the children come from given settings. There is need to devise programs which target the age when the children start using these drugs. We've seen the age of 11 years is quite young, hence need to encourage parents, school management, teachers, and even faith-based organizations to mount programs that are able to incorporate such interventions that will help us as a country tackle this challenge quite early. The study also established if you are able to tackle it quite early, then later on in life, you don't have to spend a lot of resources to counter the effects of drug use and substance abuse, which include the emergence of diseases like non-communicable diseases, which are also associated with use of some of these hard drugs. Improving and strengthening assertive and refusal skills among children is very key. This also has to start from where the learners spend their time, and both the communities, the schools, and also the environment around has a key role in terms of enhancing that. In cooperation of other stakeholders, we know the Ministry of Education, NACADA, among others, have initiatives that promote advocacy, but that has to go beyond the two. Streamlining policy that ensures conducive environment in schools, and also making sure that we strengthen guidance and counseling in our learning institutions, which have to be linked to the role of other stakeholders who do not necessarily have to be within the teaching and learning processes. Basically, those are our key highlights from the study, and thank you for listening.